What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Today, I have with me Dr. Ellana Stinson, an emergency room physician in Boston, Massachusetts, who is also the founder of Safo Hair, a hair care product line to strengthen the follicles and strand health.
While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Stinson.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about, going through undergrad and medical school and what drew you to emergency medicine.
Yeah, so it's funny. Someone was just asking me this question. We did an event with the medical students here in Boston this weekend with a nonprofit that I work for. And the students, one girl came up to the table and she was like, I want to be a neurologist. I looked at her, I was like, no, you don't. No, you don't. Because I actually wanted to be a neurologist. When I first started, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And I knew I wanted to be a physician since the 7th grade. I remember like walking down the halls, like I was going to be a psychiatrist and I was going to fix all these crazy boys that were like in middle school. I was like, something is absolutely wrong with them.
Right.
And they needed to be fixed.
Yeah. They need help.
I took it. And then after a while, like as I got into high school and went to college, I was really, really into like math and science. And I wanted to do neurology. I did a lot of neurology research. I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had some neurology Harvard professors that came down to Morehouse and taught courses. And I was like, in love. Like I knew I was going to go to Harvard. I was going to do some neuroscience or neurology research, and then really fell in love with biochemistry because it gave me the ability to still do math while doing chemistry. So I did a lot of neuroscience research at Morehouse School of Medicine. In the summers, I would go to Duke and do research. Like I was like all into the research, the neuroscience, neurology stuff was like, I was like a kid in a candy store. So I knew that I was going to go to med school and become a neurologist. And then when I got to med school and I realized what neurologists did, I was like, I can't do this. This is not my personality. And I think I kind of went into panic mode at that point because like my whole life I was like doing something with the brain up until I actually got into med school. And I was like, well, what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm doing here anymore if I'm not going to do neurology. So it wasn't until I started my rotations that they threw me into surgery and anesthesia early on, and I hated my life. Like I hated getting up before the sun. Like that is not in my DNA. Like I don't.
Yeah.
I come from like farmers and a long generation of farmers. I don't know how they did it. I would not have made it back then, but I hated getting up in the morning. The attitudes from the surgeons that we work with, like you're getting yelled at all the time, and it's like, I'm a student. What do you want? Why are you yelling at me? You know? So I actually enjoyed anesthesia, but I didn't like the fact that you weren't talking to people. I'm a very outgoing person. So then I went on and did my OBGYN, and I realized I actually like delivering babies. One day I was doing my OB rotation on my birthday, and I think my first delivery was on my birthday. And I remember saying to the baby, "Happy birthday, it's my birthday too." And I was like, that was the coolest thing in the world as a student. And I went went to Meharry Medical College, so we didn't have a ton of residency programs. So we oftentimes got to do a lot more hands-on stuff, which was actually really nice. So by the time I got to my emergency medicine rotation, it was cool. I was like, this is fine. I'm no problems. And then one day my attending looked up and she was like, go home. I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, go home. I was like, my shift isn't over yet. She's like, it's been over for like an hour. And at that point, I realized I was enjoying it so much. I did not even know my shift was over. Like I didn't even look at the
Wow.
but realized even in emergency medicine, I could do all those things that I enjoyed. I mean, I'm not doing surgery, but some traumas
Right.
come and you're kind of getting close to some surgeries and you're doing the anesthesia. And some women like to have their babies in the cars in the parking lot. So, you're still every blue moon you'll deliver a baby. So you're still doing all the things. So and then it just really fit my personality as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's a pretty awesome story. Going from psychiatry and neurology to emergency medicine. I know they say that people with shorter or doctors with short attention spans tend to go into emergency medicine.
Yeah.
Um, because you're kind of bouncing from one, exciting thing to the next. But, our medical system does a great job in terms of emergency medicine, trauma surgery. Outside of that, we don't do so well in terms of chronic disease. Our rankings are pretty low for a number of reasons, as you know. So, what led you to start the Safo hairline?
So I never ever intended on starting a hair care line. Like I'm like the furthest thing from like being a vain person. And I say that because people like to think about the beauty industry for people who only are concerned about how they look. But when I now live in Boston, and when I moved here, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer and then had fertility issues that like sent me into like all the postmenopausal and thyroid issues that you deal with when your hormones are all over the place. The thinning hair, the brittle hair, your hair falling out, you all the things. And at 30, 31, I'm just like devastated. I was like, why is this happening to me? What is happening?
Right.
And I really started looking for products on the market to really address my needs. And I didn't want to take Rogaine. I didn't want to do all those things to get my hair back. And I was like, there has to be a better option. And, me thinking about what happened, physically as well. So it sent me down this rabbit hole of like, think about what I put in and on my body. And I went to one of the top dermatologists here in Boston, and she hands me some stuff, and I'm like, I can't use this. I'm black. And then the nurse pulls me aside and she's like, I'm so sorry. We get this a lot from all of our black patients. And at that moment, I realized that there were limitations in our own practice of medicine and how we address even things that I needed. And I was just like, light bulb, right? So trying to find things on the market for me wasn't really cutting it either. So I really dug in and just was like, how can I solve this issue for me? And then I realized it was an issue for a lot of people and started really delving in, like using my chemistry background, my research background. I actually found a cosmetic chemist who actually has a PhD in this, who's
Wow.
a little bit smarter than I am and like figuring out the formulation. So we went to work in formulating products that were natural, plant-based. We just recently got our clean certification. So I'm really trying to build a product that will, as we're learning about all these toxic, harmful ingredients that are causing cancer, causing reproductive health issues, eliminating all of that from hair products so that people can get back to feeling themselves and their authentic selves and not just from a vanity standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to have, amazing skin, amazing hair, but can you do it without harming the other systems in your body? Your
Mhm.
heart, your lungs, your GI tract, your liver. The Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, has a great website, and you can put in pretty
Awesome.
much any product and it'll bring up all the toxins. And it's unfortunate that, the FDA does not really enforce because the science is there. You go to PubMed, you type in any of these ingredients, it's article after article after article. Many of them are banned in Europe and Australia and Asian countries, but we are allowed to use them here. And I think the assumption is that if it's available over the counter, that it's safe, but that's not true. And the research is there. Again, I always challenge people, will just take the ingredients and go to PubMed or go to Google Scholar, do a search, and you'll see the toxins, and what they're doing to your body, and what you put on your body, you're putting in your body, and these toxins bioaccumulate. But you said you had thyroid cancer. So are you doing well now?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I had a couple surgeries, just recently got cleared during the pandemic. So, the trickiest part about getting your thyroid taken out is getting those thyroid hormones balanced again. So finally got that together. So keep an eye on it. But yeah, all is well.
Yeah. So the thyroid, let's talk about that in relationship to
Yeah.
hair. I mean, thyroid affects every cell in the body, right? So too much thyroid or too little thyroid can negatively impact the heart, every cell, really, the brain, the hair. And so with thyroid health, obviously free T3 is important, but also the thyroid antibodies. And I see a lot of people, even in functional medicine, the or client has elevated thyroid antibodies, and they'll give them T3 or T4, T3 combo, but it's an immune system problem. Like, so you have to address the thyroid antibodies. And, what are the most common culprits? Viruses, gut bacteria like Yersinia, any self-pathogen, viruses, Epstein-Barr, et cetera, can lead to an autoimmune attack on the thyroid. So you have to address those. But in terms of thyroid hormone levels, do you see that impacting people's hair health?
Oh, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, too high, too low, it affects everything. If it's too high, you tend to have racing heart, your gut metabolism is faster, you're losing weight. And at the same time, you get drier skin, your hair starts to get brittle, starts to break off. So, you see those things when your thyroid's too high. And I actually was noticing this week that my skin was a little dry, my hair is a little dry. And I was like, those are like the signs for me to like, maybe you should go get your thyroid checked. Because even no matter, and I think people fail to realize this, even if you have the right products, if there's something off in your body, those products are never going to like get you to where you want to be. So I think,
Right.
that's the other thing that this whole process has brought me to think about is like, if something's off, you don't blame the products and throw them away and go find another product. Maybe it is time to go see your doctor or dermatologist. And then at the same time, if it's overactive and your hair starts to fall off and break off and brittle, and it's like you're getting upset with your products, and it could be your thyroid. So I have to like be mindful of that and be cognizant and listen to my body when my hair and my skin starts to change. And then there's other things too, like of course when your thyroid's high, you're hyper reflexive and you're jumpy and jittery and things like that. But there's so many different things that people don't think about, are related to thyroid and other hormone issues too. So even with like your reproductive hormones, like you can have things like bloating and weight gain and things like that, and your appetite's different. So just pay attention to like how you used to be and how things are starting to change. You're like, oh wow, I'm awfully hungry these days. And that happens too when
Absolutely.
your thyroid's high. You're always wanting to eat as well. So, that's things to kind of keep be cognizant of.
Yeah, and cortisol interacts so closely with thyroid. So if it's too high or too low, it will prevent T3 from being utilized at the cellular level. It can block the conversion of T4 to T3. So I talk to people, a great deal about that, and how cortisol and stress, impacts everything, but especially the thyroid gland. You mentioned, obviously you're African American, so hair care products, your needs are different. Talk to us about what some of those different needs are for someone of color versus someone who's Caucasian.
So it's interesting. So I talk to a lot of people in the hair industry and they say, "Oh, this will work on you. You're black." I had other black people use my hair products. But I want people to remember that we're not a monolith. So all of our hair is very, very different. If you see my hair today, I just washed it yesterday. So I just kind of blow dried it and just let it be free. So I have what some people, if you believe in the nomenclature, it's like a more 4C kinkier hair, and my hair tends to be a lot drier. So I would need something that's a lot more moisturizing and dry and hydrating on a more regular basis, as opposed to a lot of my clients who tend to have a straighter, finer hair type. and tend to have oilier hair type. So they have to be cautious of the oilier products that they put on their hair. And my hair, I'm just like, give me all the oil, give me all the
Right.
moisture. My hair is just naturally dry and does not produce oils. But there are some African Americans who do produce oils. I was actually talking to my cousin a couple months ago at my grandmother's 98th birthday, and he's
Oh,
like,
wow.
yeah, my hair is just oily all the time. And it just depends on the person and the hair type, honestly. But for my hair type, I just knew that certain products are not going to work if they're very drying and not moisturizing. And if I'm not careful, it will break my hair off. Even though it looks tough, it's very sensitive.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on products like Nutrafol? Um, Dr.
Yeah,
Sophia Krogan?
yeah, no, I've seen the testimonials. I feel like stuff like that, you have to keep taking it in order for it to keep working. So, people are raving about it. It seems to be working, but I think, it's a good product. I think people are also frustrated with the fact that even with other products that, promote hair growth, they're like, well, once I stop using it, my hair falls out again. So, that's getting to the root. Unfortunately, it doesn't get to the root cause of what's causing the hair
No pun
loss.
intended, right?
Right. So, I mean, that's what we try to educate people a lot about. Like, these products are going to help you, but you have to listen to your body and understand what the root cause is. And some of this, maybe you can figure out on your own, but I do encourage people a lot of times to see their physicians. But unfortunately, we are not trained as physicians to like deal with hair issues. So oftentimes that falls on the dermatologist, and there's some limitations there as well. So I think it's really almost like an investigative process sometimes that people have to go through to figure out what the actual root cause is.
Yeah, and in functional medicine and wellness and biohacking, we have to think through the mechanisms and we have time to do that. But if you're restricted by a 10 to 15-minute office visit, you don't have the luxury of doing that. And so, obviously you don't learn it in school. I mean, almost everything I use, I learned outside of school
Mhm.
through other healthcare providers and researching on my own. But like you said, if you have gut issues, like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, it's going to interfere with nutrient absorption. So that's going to affect every cell in the body, particularly the hair. And if you have any sort of stressor, it's going to divert resources,
Yeah.
nutritional resources, towards the problem it deems most important because your body only knows to keep you alive. It doesn't know anything about looking good in the gym or having amazing hair, stuff like that. And so, like you said, I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, this product didn't work, but they have like 17 other issues and balances that need to be addressed. So you can't, I think we've been brainwashed to think that I have this issue, I'm going to take this supplement or this medication, and it's going to solve everything. But
Yeah.
there's never just one root cause, right? It's multiple root causes, and the most common today: gut dysbiosis, stress, sleep issues, toxicity, all those things, stealth pathogens. And so, if we don't address those, then the products, aren't going to work as well.
Yeah, so I taught stress and nutrition are like the biggest thing, right? And our diet already, the food supply chain doesn't really give us the proper nutrition. I actually, when all this was happening to me, I went down the whole rabbit hole with the clean products and all this good stuff. I also really got into functional medicine and acupuncture and all of that good stuff because, when you're stressed, you have increased inflammation, cortisol levels in your body, and like you mentioned, your nutrients and your body's going to those places to heal those places and taken away from other places. And I really learned a lot during that process. You get to spend more time with your functional medicine doctor, and a lot of times they are physicians, MDs, with this additional training, so they have time to run all your traditional tests plus some additional tests that we're not taught in medical school. And I really found that to be very, very, very insightful and helped a lot with some of the gut issues I was having. And I did see a lot of changes in like my energy for one, and bloating and like my hair, and like that's kind of one thing that really got me thinking about, like, what is it that I'm putting in my body? So
Yeah.
I fully believe in functional medicine if you get the right practitioner. The only problem, of course, insurance doesn't cover it depending on type of insurance you have, but it can be pricey. So it'd be nice if everyone had a functional doctor.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I tell people it's not that I don't take insurance. Insurance doesn't take me.
Mm,
If they sat down and thought about it, they would realize it would save them billions of dollars per year.
mhm.
But in many cases, the pharmaceutical industry, the FDA, and the insurance companies are functionally one and the same organization. And so until we can get rid of some of the corruption, and get the, real treatments approved. And, to your point, I have several colleagues who were ER doctors and they transitioned into functional medicine. And so, they did, 15 to 20 years in the ER and they wanted to do something outside of that. And they realized, well, outside of emergency medicine, we don't do a very good job. No offense to anyone, it's just statistically speaking. And so, it would be great if insurance paid for this stuff. It would save, them money. It would save the client and patient money. But
Would it save them money? Because if everyone's healthy, they're not making money.
that's true. Well, the insurance company is making more money. The pharmaceutical companies are not.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's just, I read an article the other day talking about the number of, FDA, um, you know, providers or, people who sit on the FDA board who approve medication who go into the pharmaceutical industry or vice versa. And I think 9 out of the 18 people who approve drugs have either current ties to the pharmaceutical companies.
Wow.
And so it's the fox guarding the hen house, so to speak.
Yeah.
But, there are good people at the pharmaceutical companies. And I know when I've had to use the ER before, I was not interested in a glutathione push or, getting adjusted. I wanted, like, for example, I had a kidney stone in the past and I wanted pain medicine. I wanted strong pain medicine. I wanted it fast. And so I'm very thankful for emergency medicine.
Mhm.
But you think most people outside of that, if we would have less people presenting to ERs if, we ate healthier, we moved more, we incorporated, more rest periods.
Mhm.
If you look at companies like Google, they have nap rooms for their employees because if you take care of your employees are going to feel more loyal and they're going to want to contribute and they're going to be more productive. So you want to be busy or do you want to be productive? A lot of times people mistake busyness for being productive, and those are two very different things.
Yeah. I mean, I wish they would employ that in the hospital sometimes too. Like yeah, yeah. I think some industries do it better than others and they know that and they make more money as a result probably. So yeah.
Yeah, I just interviewed a gastroenterologist last week, and she was talking about how, during her residency, it was thought that, if you're not falling asleep at the nurse's station, at like 1 or 2 a.m., that you don't really care.
Mm,
But, it's not serving the patients, it's not serving the doctors. And so it would benefit everyone to, have the doctors and healthcare providers rest more and, not be so overworked
yeah.
and to incorporate, stress reduction practices.
Yeah.
So, with all that being said, emergency medicine, you've been doing it how long?
Ooh, finished school in wait, no. Probably 12 years now.
Okay.
12, 13 years. Yeah.
And how many shifts per week do you do?
Oh, it depends. So I am ER is extremely stressful. It's one of the top most stressful specialties. So I have cut back on my hours quite a bit. And one gives me space to kind of really be able to control my schedule a lot more and do all the other things. And then running Safo Hair, I can balance the two. So on average, like last week I did 4, but that was very atypical. There's some weeks I don't do any. So I guess on average each month, I might do 5 to 8 shifts each month.
Okay.
And I think, depending on which hospital you're at, like if you're doing 12-hour shifts, 10 to 12 shifts a month is full time. So just to kind of give perspective.
Yeah. And those, so you're doing 12-hour shifts. Are they night shifts?
They're 8-hour shifts. They're 8-hour
Are they 8
shifts.
hours?
Yeah, my shifts are 8 hours. So I'm doing almost like part-time hours.
Okay. And are they during the day or do you cover overnight?
I try to do as few nights as possible because it's hard for me to turn around and do other things. But I typically it's all shifts, so mornings, evenings, and night shifts in the ER.
Yeah. Well, I have a colleague who's a neurosurgeon, Dr. Jack Cruz. He's both a neurosurgeon and a dentist.
What?
But yeah, he started out in oral surgery, and he switched to neurosurgery. Well, he went back, it was like a year and a half or 2 years to get his MD, and then he did the 7-year neurosurgery residency.
Wow.
But he saw, what it was doing to his body, and he gave up night call, which took, I think, $350,000 a year off of his salary.
Hmm.
But, what good is the money doing you if you don't have your health?
Exactly. Like if you're not sleeping, you're not eating well, your body's failing you, it's not worth it.
Right. So, do you have any plans on trying to help hospital systems integrate self-care for healthcare providers?
Not self-care particularly. I have not been focused on that in the healthcare space. I'd love to be able to bridge like how we're thinking about consumer products with healthcare, will be my primary focus. Um, I don't know. I don't know if there's any helping the hospital systems with focusing on self-care. Oftentimes I jokingly say like I'm just the person at the in McDonald's that's taking your order. Because oftentimes we just feel like a cog in the wheel. And I don't know if self-care is priority at a lot of places. I know how some hospitals are starting to take it more seriously, providing like therapy, mental health services, having timeouts after trauma, like little things like that. I do think my hospital is very cognizant and making sure we're in tune and okay with like how people are feeling after certain events. But just the pace of a hospital, I don't even know where you would fit it in unless you're being strategic about it yourself at an individual basis.
Yeah, and the number of hours I remember talking to a guy I went to undergrad with when he was in residency, the same place I got my doctorate, and he said when you do the math, the residents make less than minimum wage in terms of hours per week.
Mhm.
Um, And I feel like it's one of those situations where the philosophy is, well, I went through it, so therefore you have to go through it, even though we know it's not serving the patients or the provider. And so it just kind of gets perpetuated.
I almost feel like in some instances, at least we're moving a little bit away from that. It doesn't feel as toxic, but it could be the environment I'm in now. Some areas could still be pretty toxic, but they've regulated like resident hours and how many overnights and hours they can work consecutively. So some of those changes happened after I left residency. So I guess they're making some adjustments, not a whole lot, but yeah.
Well, if you look at the studies on people, it was in a controlled environment, so no one would get hurt. But they had people who were sleep deprived and people who consumed, enough alcohol so they were well above the legal blood alcohol level. And the most impaired people were the people who were sleep deprived.
Oh, I believe it. I believe
And
it.
so, and unfortunately in high school, we had to spend a week in the profession we thought we were going to go into. So I went and shadowed an attending in the emergency room. And there was a resident who unfortunately got into a car accident and passed away. Now, can they prove it was strictly sleep deprivation? No. But did that contribute? Absolutely.
Mm.
So it's unfortunate, but I think it does, or it has gotten better depending on the hospital system. But in terms of self-care and hair health, talk about the importance of just setting boundaries and how that can play a role in your overall health.
Yeah, I think, we have to be owners of our own bodies, right? Like we have to know, again, listen to your body, know when it's time to rest, know when to do certain things. And, I am very intentional about how I use my time. Um, there are days and there are weeks that I'm just like working, 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 but like I recognize, okay, I've been working a lot. I need to take a break. Like yesterday, I just sat on the couch. I did a whole self-care day. I did my skin, I did my hair. I'm like, this is me day. And, I've been working out in the gym, try to go every day or do something, ride my Peloton. And I'm very cognizant of that. So I know that if I'm not doing those things, my energy's low. Like I'm paying attention to these things. So I have to be cognizant of what I'm doing with my body. And I think everyone should be mindful of that. And I know we oftentimes have so much going on in our lives. We have to make ourselves a priority regardless of how much is going on.
Absolutely. And in terms of, circling back to hair health, one thing I learned in the past 5 years is mast cell activation. They release histamine, but they also release inflammatory prostaglandins, prostaglandin D2, prostaglandin F2 alpha, and those can contribute to hair loss.
Mhm.
And so a colleague of mine who's a functional medicine MD, taught me that several years ago. And, research is there, but more importantly, I think a lot of times we forget the whole point of research is to improve patient outcomes. And if you have a patient in front of you telling you something, you should probably listen, right? Like, what they say, 90% of what you need to know, the patient will tell you, right?
Mhm.
If you just listen. But in terms of, hair health, things that people can do, PRP, exosomes or stem cells, hair transplants. I know of one guy who went to Europe for a hair transplant. Talk
Mhm.
to us about your thoughts on those.
I don't know much about the hair transplant process or the procedure. I actually known a couple people that have gotten it and they've had really decent results. Um, any procedure can be dangerous. There's always risk of infections or not taking. And I think if just being mindful, I employ everyone to do their research before they go into any type of process to or procedure, any type of procedure, regardless if it's same day in and out. You always want to know the complications. So many times we hear stories about like, oh, I was just supposed to go in for this easy procedure and then I ended up in the hospital with this, that, and the other. And I think it's also tricky as well going out of the country because regulations on the are also very different in other countries around how care is delivered, quality of care, sterile procedures, things like that. There are some standard of care type things, but there are some very different regulations and risk management, things like that. So I would just be very mindful of those things and make sure you're doing your research.
Yeah, absolutely. I do know. I mean, there's obviously people doing things like on the black market. Like there was a whole episode on National Geographic about people who aren't even healthcare providers doing BBL, Brazilian butt lifts, in like hotel rooms.
Yeah, I seen that.
And there was a clinic in South Florida. I think there were several, but there's one in particular, and they had like OR next to OR next to OR. And the doctor may be in there, the surgeon may be in there for, you know, a fourth of the procedure, but then it's just a nurse or a medical assistant, even. And so people were getting hurt.
Mhm.
Um, and, obviously they were making a lot of money. But I have talked to dentists, for example, who say some of the best surgical work they've seen has come from South American countries. And a lot of times, here, if you need a dental procedure, it might be $30 to $40,000. You can
Mhm.
get it for, a fraction of that, maybe 8 to 10,000. And as long as there's lots of testimonials, you do your research.
Do your
Um,
research.
yeah, because a lot of European countries, for example, if you have or if you potentially need cardiac bypass surgery in Germany, at least it was up until a few years ago, they required you to get, I think it was like 30 chelation treatments, IV chelation treatments,
Mm.
because they knew that that was going to solve 80 to 85% of the issues in terms of cleaning out arterial plaque. And then, the rest of the people would go on and have the surgery.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a great book on that topic called Bypassing Bypass Surgery. It's written by a Harvard trained MD, actually. And I've, seen it change people's lives, help them avoid surgery. But, the pharmaceutical companies aren't making money off of it. And so, or the hospital systems aren't making money of it. It's outside and independent clinics. Um, and, you have to be careful with it if you have a lot of heavy metals in your body in terms of opening up your drainage pathways. but it can certainly, be helpful.
Mm,
And there's so many techniques that, they use in Europe that have been used for, 40,
yeah.
50 years that we're just not open to here because I learned about there's a guy named Dr. Zach Bush, who's a triple board certified MD, but he talked about blocking patterns. And he talked about when he was, I think, a resident, he was doing some research and he came across a derivative of vitamin A with very potent anti-cancer properties. So he
Mm,
called up one of the pharmaceutical companies and was very excited and told him about his findings. And they were not very nice to him and they hung up the phone. So he went to his advisor the next day. She said, "You never should have called them because they are going to utilize a blocking patent where they patent it just to protect the therapies they already have with, and they're never intending to bring it to market." So
interesting.
these
Yeah,
things,
I mean, I've had friends go to Colombia for dental work and they loved it. And I mean, it was seemed to be decent work. So I'm not saying other countries aren't as good. I'm just saying be careful,
yeah,
and do research for sure. Because and never know, it could be really awesome procedure and you get good care, but then also the follow-up, if you need follow-up, you're not going to go back to that country and get the follow-up. So
yeah.
someone here would need to know how that procedure was done to even, help you. So those are things to kind of keep in mind.
The clinics that I know of in Europe that do, dental procedures like mercury amalgam removals, they
Mhm.
require you to stay a certain amount of time. Like they may have you sign a document that you're going to stay for like a week and a half, to have 3 follow-up visits. And, they'll do some IV nutritional therapy to help expedite recovery, like IV vitamin C and things like that. And a lot of American doctors refer to those clinics. So those are the ones that, I trust because they have a
We
track
actually
record of.
have, I actually had my mercury removed from my teeth. Yeah, and I went to we have functional dentists here.
Yeah.
And I went to functional dentists and they did all of that, like the vitamin C and all that type of stuff. I was really, really, I did my research and I was like, this is what I want. I want this process, and found a clinic here in Massachusetts that would do all of that for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I don't know if this is still true, but up until a few years ago, if a dentist says they're going to remove your mercury amalgams because mercury is dangerous, they could lose their license.
Mm,
Several have. But if they say they're doing it for cosmetic procedures, it's totally fine.
I did not know that. I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
it's very, very, it's corrupt and it's strange. But I mean, you go to PubMed, you type in mercury and neurons or mercury and brain health. You can see when they expose neurons to mercury, they die. So
Mm,
it can't possibly be good. And, if you have that mercury and you're chewing, every time you chew, you're releasing mercury vapor.
yeah.
And so, well, as that has negative consequences on the thyroid, the brain, and I've never seen any heavy metal tests that were reliable that didn't have at least 1 or 2 elevated metals. Usually it's 3 or 4, a
Wow.
combination of mercury, aluminum, lead. Cadmium is very common in women with breast cancer to be elevated. But in terms of hair health, do you have plans to develop more products in the future?
We have some that are done, but just bringing product to the market is expensive. It's time consuming, and it also requires a lot of testing. I think we're just gonna continue to figure out our process right now with the products we have. We have some other products where we play around with mushroom extracts and things like that that have antioxidants that are really great for the scalp. And then those types of things that are going to help really promote healthy scalp. Eventually we'll bring them to market, but right now we have quite a few products out right now that we're trying to just really get out there, market, and just get right product market fit and figure out the different revenue streams. And then at some point we will bring those other products to market, but for sure.
Absolutely. And in terms of oral supplements that you recommend that
Mhm.
people take, like for example, biotin is one,
Gonna
there's
say bye.
silica.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you recommend those for hair growth and hair
I
strength?
typically I do biotin, I do collagen as well, collagen supplements that one of my orthopedic friends told me about. But I don't do a ton of supplements for the hair because the way I think about supplements, unless I'm like super deficient, it's gonna be some really expensive pee. We pee it all out anyways. So, I do the biotin, I do the collagen, I eat my fruits and vegetables and drink my water.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I learned about 10 years ago from a nutritionist named Dr. Johnny Bowden is he says, when we test athletes for performance enhancing drugs, we test the urine, right? And if it's present in the urine, we say, oh, they've taken, performance enhancing drugs. But with nutrients, if they're in the urine, we say, oh, it's just expensive urine, they utilize it. But that's not true. The body, water soluble vitamins, the body will flush out, but we have higher nutritional requirements. For example, with the RDA, that's assuming you're living in a bubble, no toxic exposures, no stressors. And so I get people all the time, oh, my serum B12 is elevated. That literally means nothing. High in the blood, low in the cell.
I actually do vitamin D as well. Vitamin D, and at one point I was taking some vitamin E, I believe.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah. D3 is important. I do
and
genetic testing.
K2,
K2,
K2.
yeah. K2 is like a molecular Uber for calcium. It prevents calcification for the arteries.
Mhm.
But the D3, so I do genetic testing to see, there's three parts to it. There's the activation, which is the CYP2R1 gene
Mhm.
to convert D2 to D3. There's the binding protein, which is GC or the vitamin D binding protein. And then there's the vitamin D receptor. So if you have certain genetic variants in the vitamin D binding protein, you're best splitting your dose in the morning and then early afternoon versus
Oh,
all in the morning.
I usually do it all in the morning. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I use the DNA company
Uh-huh.
and I can send you that information, but
Yeah,
it's a
please
lot of
do.
stuff. It actually looks at hormonal pathways. For example, SRD 5A2 is the 5 alpha reductase gene,
Mhm.
converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone. So some people who have certain genetic variants will produce too much DHT and the hair follicles become sensitized to it. And it's not necessarily the elevated DHT, it's the sensitization process that drives it. But we look at that, and we even look at a gene called SLC01B1 that
Mhm.
tells you how well you can process statin drugs and your risk for myopathy. Now, granted, everyone can benefit from CoQ10, but certain genetic variants have more of a risk of myopathy than others.
Mm. See, I didn't know that certain people had risk, and I know the CoQ10 would be helpful. That I didn't know the genetic risk. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so, it's all based on research and science. I think the stat I've heard is it takes 17 years to go from bench to bedside. So a lot of times people say, oh, well, there's no research on that. I'm like, no, you just haven't heard about it, but it's there. It takes 17 years and patients don't have that long to wait.
Yeah. Wow.
What's one thing or two things today you wish you would have known 10 years ago?
Mm. 10 years ago. I don't know. I feel like I'm still on that journey. That's a good question. I'm gonna have to think about that one some more. I'm not sure. Not sure.
Maybe self-care, the importance of self-care?
I have been incorporating self-care for at least 10 years.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's when I started with all the functional medicine, the acupuncture, all of that stuff. I started like 10, 11 years ago. So I've been really cognizant of that um, since my early 30s. So yeah,
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and thank you for the work that you're doing. Keep spreading the good word about self-care and functional medicine.
I sure
And
will.
we'll put up the link. What's the website real quick? We're
Yeah,
going to put it
so
up.
you can find my brand Safo Hair at safohair.com. That's SAFOHAIR.com. We're on all social media platforms. Same thing, Safo Hair, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We love for you to try some of our products, give us some feedback, let us know what you think. And we just got a Leave-In Conditioner of the Year award. So I think,
Awesome.
really awesome product, if I do
And you
say
said
so.
it's Sappho Hairr.
Hair, Hair, just one R.
Just one R. Okay.
Mm.
All right. Perfect. We'll put that up. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Stinson. We hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
You too.